Assalamualaikum everyone. Today we will be going through chapter 9, gas exchange and smoking, one of the shortest chapter in AS. In this chapter we will be looking at the structure of the lungs, structure of respiratory tract such as the trachea, the bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli. And we will be looking also at the effect of smoking towards the lungs. So before we proceed, let us look at some of the learning outcomes, the thing that you should be able to get after going through the chapter. First, you must be able to describe the structure of the human gas exchange system. You must be able to describe and explain the distribution of tissues and cells within the gas exchange system. You must be able to describe the function of these tissues and cells. Next, you must be able to explain how gases are exchanged in the lungs. You must be able to explain how tobacco smoke affects the gas exchange system. And you must be able to describe the effects of nicotine and carbon monoxide on the cardiovascular system. Why do large organisms such as mammals need a very complex and extensive system to take in oxygen and bring out carbon dioxide? Why can't we obtain those gases just by simply absorbing it directly through our skin? This is because the total surface area per volume ratio of large organism is very low, and thus making gaseous exchange through such way is impossible. Having a specialized and extensive system like the lungs will help to increase the ratio of total surface area per volume, thus increase the efficiency of gaseous exchange. Okay. Unlike large organism, small organisms such as paramecium, it can meet their requirement for the supply of nutrients and oxygen and the removal of waste products by means of diffusion. Because the very small distances that substances have to travel means that the supply or removal by diffusion is sufficient enough for their needs. Some of the function of the gas exchange system in larger organism, a larger multicellular organism, is to link the circulatory system with the atmosphere, okay, to clean and warm the air that enters the body of those organisms, to maximize the surface area for diffusion, to minimize the distance for diffusion, and to maintain adequate gradients for diffusion. This is a diagram of an amoeba, which is a type of unicellular organism. And like any other unicellular organism, the size of amoeba is really small, which causes it to have a very large total surface area per volume ratio. Therefore, oxygen, for example, can simply diffuse from the fluid outside of the cell through the cell surface membrane and reach every part of the cytoplasm inside of it. These are some of the points that I've mentioned just now about how large multicellular organism requires a specialized and extensive gas exchange system to achieve the large total surface area per volume ratio. So let's look at the structure of the lungs as shown in this diagram. As you can see, the lungs are inside the thoracic cavity. Okay? which is inside the rib cage, surrounded by a membrane known as the pleural membrane, which encloses an airtight space. This space contains a small quantity of fluid known as the pleural fluid or pleural effusion to allow friction-free movement as the lungs are ventilated by the movement of the diaphragm and ribs. So let's look at the structure again. So the airways starts from the trachea, which branches into two smaller tubes known as the bronchi. Each bronchus subdivides and branches extensively to form a bronchial tree in each lungs. Right. So if you look at the diagram here, you can see that the bronchiole it will branch out and it forms a kind of like a tree structure inside the lung known as the bronchial tree. And smaller branches will come out of the terminal bronchiole known as the respiratory bronchiole that supply the alveoli with air, right? So you have trachea, it will then branches out to two bronchi, and then from the two bronchi, it will branch out to become terminal bronchiole, and from the terminal bronchiole, it will branch out into even smaller tubes known as respiratory bronchiole, and at the end of the respiratory bronchiole, you will have the alveoli duct and also the alveoli. Okay, and if you look at this diagram, you can see that every single alveoli will be supplied with an extensive network of blood capillaries. So this is a light micrograph of part of trachea in transverse section, magnified to 65 times its original size. The lining is comprised of ciliated epithelium, which rests on a basement membrane made of protein fibers. In between the ciliated cells are goblet cells. You can see the one that's stained blue. Okay, the goblet cells, and beneath the epithelium is an area of loose tissue with blood vessels and mucus gland. Right? So all this irregular circular structure that lies beneath the epithelial layer are the blood vessels. Right? Are the blood vessels. The trachea as a whole is supported by C-shaped rings of cartilage. You can't really see the whole thing here, but you can see the largest part of this diagram that sits at the bottom of the loose tissue and the epithelial layer. So this is what we call as the C-shaped cartilage. You can only see a portion of it. Okay. So this is a magnified version of the upper layer of the trachea that we have seen just now. As you can see, the uppermost layer are made up of ciliated epithelium cells, which are epithelial cells with hairy-like structure, okay, known as cilia that is attached on top of them. Okay, sometimes they are also known as pseudo-stratified ciliated epithelium cells because they give the appearance of being made from multiple layers, when in fact they are only made up of one single layer. Because in Latin, pseudo means false and stratified means multiple layers. So it's a false multiple layers. In between the ciliated epithelium, there are a lot of cells with large groove known as goblet cells. These cells secrete mucus which help the airways to trap and filter unwanted particles during inhalation. Right? So this large swelling kind of structure, okay, these are known as the goblet cells. And what do? They produce mucus to trap. Okay, they produce sticky mucus to trap unwanted particles during inhalation. You can also see the thick basement membrane, okay, made up of protein just beneath the ciliated epithelium layer, and beneath the basement membrane, okay, are the loose tissues with the blood vessels. Right? There are also a lot of plasma cells, okay, which is a type of white blood cell that can squeeze themselves out of the blood vessel and scout within the loose tissue to seek for pathogenic invasion and destroy them. So, and this is a full cross section of the trachea, and as you can see, this diagram gives you a better view, okay, or an overall view of the presence of the C-shaped cartilage on the trachea. Okay. So the C-shaped structure that you see here are the cartilage, and the C-shaped cartilage helps to strengthen the trachea and prevent it from collapsing during breathing. Because whenever you breathe in or you breathe out, okay, high pressure will be created throughout the airways. These are some description on the structure of trachea that we have discussed just now. And this is a light micrograph of part of bronchus transverse section, and this has been magnified 300 times its original size. Okay, so this is the ciliated epithelial layer, okay, and in between the ciliated epithelial cells, okay, you can see there are some cells that are stained pink, right? And those pink cells, you can see that they are a little bit swollen. Those are the goblet cells. Right? There are fewer goblet cells, compared to goblet cells in the trachea. Right? And their epithelial cells, okay, are also not as tall as the epithelial cells on the trachea. And beneath the epithelial layer, you can see that there are an elastic fibers, right? And instead of C-shaped cartilage, like those you found on the trachea, okay, the bronchus is supported by block, cartilage in block formation, right? And you can see part of the cartilage here, okay, also stained pink. This is another diagram or a transverse section of bronchus, and I think this will give you a better idea on how the structure of cartilage is arranged. Like I said, bronchus, they don't have the C-shaped cartilage formation, but they have what we call as block cartilage. Okay? So this is one block, okay, and this is another, okay, and a few more over here. So in bronchus, the cartilage is arranged in block formation. So these are some important points that we have discussed just now on the structure of bronchus. So further down the respiratory tract are the bronchioles, and this is a light micrograph of small bronchioles magnified 135 times of its original size. Okay, so not much of structure that you can actually see here. Okay, you can see that these are the epithelial layer. Right? The first layer is always the epithelial layer, and surrounding the epithelial layer are the smooth muscles. Right? So there are no cartilage on the bronchioles. Right? And all of these small gaps, right, or spaces here are the alveoli. The table that you see here summarizes the structure of trachea, bronchus, bronchiole, and alveoli. And as you can see, only trachea and bronchus are supported by cartilage. Remember, trachea, trachea is supported by the C-shaped cartilage, while both of the bronchi are supported by the block-shaped cartilage. Okay, the same goes for the goblet cells, as they are only found in the trachea and bronchus. Okay. As for smooth muscle, you can find it from the trachea down to the terminal bronchiole, while ciliated epithelium, okay, uh, they are stretched until the respiratory bronchiole. And out of all of this structure that you have here, gaseous exchange only occur at the alveolar duct and the alveoli. So let's look at the journey of air through the airways and into the lungs. First, as air flows through the nose and the trachea, it is warmed to body temperature and moistened by evaporation of water from the lining of the airways. And this is done to protect the delicate surfaces inside the lungs from drying out. So every single time, you need to keep the airways or the respiratory tract moist, right? And to protect the surface of the airways from suspended matter, okay, such as the bacteria, the viruses, okay, dust particles, okay, those particles that are larger than 10 micrometer, okay, will be caught by hairs and mucus inside the nose and the airways. Remember that the lining of the trachea and bronchus contain a lot of goblet cells. These goblet cells produce a type of substances known as mucin. And mucin is a type of glycoprotein with many branches which make them sticky. And this will enable the airways to trap unwanted particles. Okay. Once trapped by the mucus, the continuous beating of the hair-like structure known as the cilia, okay, will carry the mucus upwards towards your throat or larynx to be swallowed. Okay, and once they are swallowed, all of those particles will be digested by the acid and enzymes, okay, inside the digestive system. And a lot of phagocytic white blood cells, such as the macrophages, okay, will patrol the surface of the airways, scavenging small particles such as bacteria and dust. Okay, bacteria, viruses, and also very fine dust. This is to ensure that the airways remain healthy and undamaged. The diagram that you see here is a scanning electron micrograph of the tracheal surface. Okay, you can see a large number of cilia. In these hairy projections here are the cilia, and also some goblet cells. Right? Some goblet cells. Okay, so a little bit on the structure of alveoli. Alveoli are structures at the very end of the respiratory tract, and they are the only structure that contain the elastic fibers, which allow them to stretch and expand during inhalation and recoil during exhalation. And since they are the site for gaseous exchange, the walls of alveoli are extremely thin, and each of the alveoli are made up of a single layer of squamous epithelial cells, which has the size of about 0.5 micrometer. I mean, the thickness is about 0.5 micrometer. What is squamous epithelial? Squamous epithelial are epithelial cells that has a flattened kind of appearance. Because it's totally different from the epithelial cells that you see on the trachea or the bronchus. Those epithelial cells has the cuboidal type of appearance. They are more squarish as compared to the epithelial cells on the alveoli. Okay. On the alveoli, the epithelial cells are very flat, and they are known as the squamous epithelial cells. And there are a lot of thin single cell blood capillaries pressed closely against the alveoli, right? And this increases the efficiency of diffusion of O2 and CO2 between the blood capillary and also the alveoli. So I guess I will stop here for today. I think another session we will be able to finish up chapter 9. Right? So with that, thank you very much, guys. I'll see you during the next session. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.